coming, because in this moment it's not coming yet.
Set up your meeting for YouTube Live. Okay, now we are online, I guess.
Not yet. It's not coming yet.
Set up your meeting for.
Did you? Okay. I don't know. Can you see? For me, I don't see the video. Yes, here. We are now. Very good. Okay, thank you. I think that we are now live. I don't see. Yes. As you can see, we have been struggling today. Sorry for this. And I see that we are finally on live. And first of all, my apologies because we are starting a little bit late, but unfortunately, we have been struggling a little bit with some technicalities. Hopefully, we will get better soon. And anyway, they are all a very welcome to this fourth lecture in our Radical Environmental Humanities series with Professor Giovanna De Chiro. My name is Mark Armiero, and I am the editor-in-chief of Resistance, a journal of Radical Environmental Humanities. I am coordinating this lecture with Lizzie Privitera from the University of Toronto and Nuno Marquez from KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden. This lecture series is co-hosted by Resistance and the Institute for the History of Science at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. Lizzie will introduce our guest speaker today, and Nuno will say a few words about the lecture series. I'll take a moment to introduce our journal, but first of all, I would like to thank Giovanna De Chiro and all our speakers who generously accepted our invitation and are really here for this series of lectures. Resistance is a relatively new journal, previously titled Resilience. I changed its name when I became the editor-in-chief to reflect a new intellectual and political agenda. While resilience focuses on enduring stresses and returning to a prior state, resistance is about fighting back and changing the conditions that cause crisis in the first place. Allow me to quote here from our distinguished guest. In her essay on the man Anthropocene, Giovanna De Chiro writes, and I'm quoting from Giovanna, the recent calls for resilience emanating from the international climate science and policy establishment are embedded in the gendered and racialized power dynamics of global political and economic systems. While women of color and their children are the primary victims of climate change and those expected to adapt to its worst impacts, it is predominantly white upper-class men who are the primary spokesperson, decision makers, and pontificators in all spheres of climate science, economics, and politics. End quote. Our aim as Resistance is to become a reference point for radical scholarship in the environmental humanities. And if you are wondering what is radical in the environmental humanities, well, here is our working definition. Radical environmental humanities include any approach that questions the current state of a society and academia, stands in solidarity with grassroots movements and oppressed subjects, and contributes to research fostering more just socio-ecological relationships. But more than a definition for us, this is a starting point for a collective quest, and this lecture series and this lecture today is part of our shared research journey. And I now give the floor to Nuno. And again, apologies for starting a little bit late today.
Thank you, Marco. Hello, everyone. My name is Nuno Marques. I'm a member of the collective at Resistance. So just to say brief words that this lecture is the fourth in a series on radical environmental humanities. taking place once a month from September. So it started September this year, and it will go until June next year, 2025. This series will bring together a community of radical scholars to share ideas, stories, and dreams for the world we so desperately need. With this lecture series, we aim to contribute to the collective quest to reinvent and reenact radical environmental humanities. Our ambition is to create a community of practices and solidarity rather than a fixed canon, because for us, radicality is always a quest, a horizon, a collective and unresolved question about ourselves and our commitment to change the world. So we are happy to have such incredible speakers in this series and invite you to their coming lectures, which will be, I will just briefly announce them. On January 21st, Malcolm Ferdinand. On February 11, Nidvedita Menon. On March 18, Eric Swingedau. On April 10, Numino Basse. On May 20, Stefania Barca. And on June 25, Raul Zibecki. Like Marcus said, you can find the lecture program with detailed information in the Facebook page of the Resistance Journal and at the webpage of the Institute for the History of Science at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. Thank you, and now I give the floor to Lizzie.
Thank you, Nuno. Hello, everyone. My name is Lizzie Gritera, and I am a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Toronto, and a member of the collective at the Resistance Journal. And I am here today to introduce the speaker of today, Professor Giovanna Di Chiro, and help moderate the Q&A. Professor Giovanna Di Chiro is a distinguished professor of environmental studies at Swarthmore College, where she teaches courses on environmental justice theory, ecofeminism, and community sustainability, and coordinates the Environmental Justice and Community Resilience Program. Di Chiro has published and lectured widely on the topics of environmental and climate justice movements, human rights, feminism and ecology, and food security. She has collaborated with and served as faculty partner with environmental justice organizations focusing on environmental health, urban agriculture, and food justice, biocolonialism, and just sustainability. Di Chiro is also co-editor of Appropriating Technology, Vernacular Science and Social Power of the University of Minnesota Press, and is completing a book titled Worldmaking from the Ground Up, the Praxis of Environmental Justice with the University of California Press. Today's seminar will delve into the this research specifically, and we look forward to her insights. Before we begin, please submit your comments and questions on our Facebook page or on our YouTube channel during the talk. Nuno and I will share your questions during the Q&A session. And thank you very much for your attention. And Giovanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks so much to Marco and Lizzie and Nuno for inviting me to this speaker series of the Journal of Resistance. I'm really happy to be here. I'm very honored to have been invited and to get to see and be working with so many colleagues and friends, and hopefully meeting new colleagues and new friends, if only virtually. So, resistance. So in recent years, I think the question about what we mean by resistance has really risen to the surface. And I think it's taken on even a greater urgency in this moment of polycrisis that we're facing on an international scale. So perhaps, as Marco explained, the journal's recent name change and maybe its recentering its mission on resistance comes at an appropriate time. Grace Lee Boggs used to pose the question to organizers, what time is it on the clock of the world? To urge them to think historically and strategically as they build their political strategies. What does or should effective resistance look like now? I like the straightforward definition that's posted on the journal's website that Marco read. Resistance is about taking action to challenge and change the conditions that lead to crises, unquote. And I'm also very interested in thinking about how this interdisciplinary field that we are engaging with, the so-called radical environmental humanities, I'm interested in thinking about how this field can play a meaningful role in challenging current conditions and helping to build a different world. So it's very heartening for me to be in conversation with a group of scholars and activists and speakers who are engaged in these questions and want to take them seriously. In the weeks since the outcome of the US presidential election, and while the wannabe dictator and his cabinet of horrors and clowns are getting ready to take power, many activists and progressive organizers are also ramping up and putting into place the kinds of responses and forms of resistance that will be necessary in the coming weeks, months, and years. So I think if all the technology goes right, I think I'll share my screen now. Okay, can people?
Yes, we can
Okay.
see we can see the screen.
Okay,
First
great.
slide.
Okay. So in response to the big question, what is needed for resistance now in order to survive the Trump era with its sights set on eviscerating any inkling of the welfare state in the United States, many progressive leaders, we need to ground ourselves or continue to ground ourselves, working locally in our communities to focus on things like collective care, to support mutual aid, to engage in multiple forms of care work for people and the land that you live on. So, for example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC, who's a Democratic representative from New York, expressed this goal on her social media feed. She said, "We are about to enter a political period that will have consequences for the rest of our lives. We cannot give up. I think that what we can do is to prepare. To prepare is to build community. We do not have a choice. Our choice is to build. Our choice is to continue to fight. Our choice is to win. Our choice is to have each other's backs." And likewise, this message from the NDN Collective, which is a collective of radical indigenous environmental and climate justice organizers in the US, and they put out on their website, "In the coming days, weeks, and months, it's going to be critical that we take the time to check in with one another, strengthen and deepen our relationships with each other. There's no better time than now to stay grounded in community and our cultural values. We must ask ourselves these questions. What does collective care look like for your community? How can we lean into mutual aid, capacity building, and skill sharing within our shared communities? What organizing can take place to create the collective networks of support that are needed now?" In a similar vein, I've conceived of the concept of world making from the ground up as the on-the-ground practices of resisting and rebuilding. That is, the practices of resisting the harms of social and ecological violence, and the practices of building and rebuilding relationships of care and interdependency that are happening every day in our communities across the world. What some scholars and activists, including myself, have thought about in the terms of social reproduction, or commoning, or solidarity economies, or prefigurative politics, or abolition ecologies, among many other framings. So in my own work in environmental studies, I examine world making from the ground up as engaging in two worlding projects simultaneously. On the one hand, it is the project of resisting the world as it is, in other words, the death-making world of fossil capitalism and eco-colonialism that continues to target marginalized communities, non-human species, and all life-making systems on Earth. And at the same time, it is about the project of imagining and building more relational, caring, and life-enhancing worlds in the making. For me, as someone whose work is situated in academia, this is also about building relational forms of teaching, research, and community engagement that help to ignite and amplify the stores of energy that we will need to resist and rebuild our communities, and our visions for an inclusive Earth Commons, and our hopes for the possibilities of another world. So at this time on the clock of the world, when our energies are being drained and the planet's resilience is at a tipping point, I think meaningful acts of resistance and rebuilding will require many kinds of energizing and re-energizing, including, for example, the engineering of safe, renewable electricity generating technologies, the energy of sustainable and regenerative food production, the energy of imagination to make the impossible possible, as James Baldwin exhorted activists to do, and the energy needed for sustainable organizing for the long haul, which must also include the essential need for rest, for recharging our stores of energy. I've learned a lot about the multiple forms of energy that are embedded in resistance, survival, hope, and imagination from the scholar activist stories that I teach in my environmental humanities courses and from the activists that I collaborate with together with my students at Swarthmore College, which is a liberal arts college located in the Philadelphia metropolitan area. My students and I engage with and learn about structures of hope and world making from and with members of predominantly Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities whose lives are directly and most severely impacted by the harms of environmental toxicity and by the catalog of ever-worsening climate disasters. I think that the voices and visionary life-making strategies of these community activists teach us about the kinds of active and energized hope that is required to enable genuine sustainability and to build possible worlds in the ruins of capitalism and in the looming threats of the magosphere. So to foreground a central ecofeminist principle that guides my own work, I'm interested in the questions of who we imagine as members of our community as we imagine and build sustainable futures, and whom do we see as partners in co-creating a more just and sustainable world. Again, I've been deeply influenced by the scholars and activists that I've studied with and collaborated with over the past 4 decades, and I want to cite a few of them here. And then in the second part of my talk, I want to share with you some of the community collaborations that my students and I are involved in, and in working in partnership with environmental justice activists who are engaged in both resistance and world making. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the important mentors for me is the late Grace Lee Boggs, who is the Detroit-based Marxist feminist revolutionary who in her 100-year life, after having participated in virtually every major social and environmental justice movement of the 20th and 21st centuries, she concluded that social movements are born of critical connections rather than critical mass. I agree with Boggs that building critical connections across differences of all kinds is what fuels strong communities and robust movements. We've seen the escalation of populism and authoritarian regimes in the US and around the world, and how powerful and effective these divide and conquer strategies have been. So building cross-community, cross-cultural, and translocal connections and alliances are vitally important at this time on the clock of the world. I've also been deeply influenced by the superpowers of what I'd call critical optimism and world building from my collaborations with activists in environmental justice communities across the country. Several decades ago, the indigenous Maya and Opata ecofeminist and environmental justice leader Teresa Leal taught me that, quote, cynicism is a luxury available primarily to those whose lives aren't immediately impacted by environmental or climate hazards, or who can reduce the harmful effects by doing things like buying organic products or turning up the air conditioning when the temperatures soar into triple digits. Teresa called her activism survival at its finest, and she taught me that our research and change efforts cannot carelessly dismiss the future, and that we must integrate the radical critiques of colonialism, racial capitalism, and heteropatriarchy together with active forms of hope rooted in principles of intergenerational equity. For many years, until her untimely death in 2016, we worked together in partnership with researchers and local activists to support the organizing efforts of the organization Comadres, a group of women workers organizing for labor rights and environmental justice in the maquiladoras, the offshore assembly factories located at the US-Mexico border. I've also been influenced by the concept of hope used by Black feminist activists and prison abolitionists in the US, including the educator and organizer Mariam Kaba, who has insisted that, as she calls it, hope is a discipline. She says, hope doesn't preclude feeling sadness or frustration or anger or any other emotion. That makes total sense. Hope isn't an emotion. Hope is not optimism. Hope is a discipline. We have to practice it every day. Like Boggs, she argues in favor of a prefigurative form of politics, saying that we need to, quote, prefigure in our everyday lives the world we desire and are trying to build. Making the case that abolition is not just an act of dismantling, but is a world-making practice, geographer Ruth Wilson Gilmore argues that abolition is about presence, not an erasure, an absence, or a lack. It's about the presence of things that make life livable and that embody what she terms radical interdependency: clean air and water, healthy food, decent housing, secure livelihoods, good schools. Gilmore thinks of abolition as life in rehearsal. Again, what other scholars and activists have referred to as prefigurative politics. That is, enacting in your everyday life the care-based social and ecological relationships that will enable the transition to the world you are working towards. In her writing, Gilmore elaborates, abolition is building the skills, relationships, and institutions we need to meet our individual and collective material needs. It is a process of exploring how to be in right relationship with each other and the world around us. It therefore requires us to unlearn and unmake colonialism, racial capitalism, ableism, cis-heteropatriarchy, and imperialism in order to make way for a world in which social and ecological violence are no longer possible. For Gilmore, Kaba, and others, these experiments in making and remaking future worlds in the present are enacted in small, everyday actions at the scale of the self, the family, the community, and the city. It's through these everyday actions in our communities, creating new ways of thinking, doing, and being, they argue, that the possibility of mobilizing the collective power needed to shift large entrenched systems can emerge. For many activists, engaging in prefigurative politics requires the imagination of otherwise worlds, and so many draw on an organizing strategy known as speculative fiction to invite people to imagine other ways of living that can break free from patriarchal and colonialist mindsets. Speculative fiction is a practice that helps people to imagine and to practice in everyday life the living worlds they are working to create. The feminist abolitionist educator Walida Imarisha argues that social movements committed to liberated futures need to practice reimagination, and she proposes honing the skills of imagination in what she calls visionary fiction. Emerisha maintains that all progressive political organizing can be seen as speculative science fiction because organizing is about fighting for and shaping a desired future world that no one has yet experienced. She emphasizes that visionary fiction is not about utopian thinking, however. Rather, it is the refusal to be pressured into, quote, being realistic in our political organizing. Central to the practice of ecofeminist abolition, she and others claim um, is being unrealistic. What we must be is unrealistic. Being unrealistic for her means imagining and inhabiting today the not yet real future world we are working to create. Similarly, in recent years, my students and I have learned what critical optimism means through our collaborations with Zulene Mayfield, who is the longtime leader of Chester Residents' Concern for Quality Living, which is pronounced CIRCLE. This is a 32-year-old grassroots environmental justice organization from Chester, Pennsylvania, which is a city of 34,000 people that is located about 3 miles away from my university and about 15 miles south of Philadelphia. The population of Chester is 75% African American, and it has a 38% poverty rate. And the city houses the largest waste incinerator in the country, which is run by the multinational waste company Covanta. And of course, there is a dark side to this notion of worlding and reworlding. So Covanta has rebranded or renamed itself Reworld. And so the question, of course, is what new world does this waste management corporation see itself as building? Zulene and Circle's decades-long struggle against environmental racism, fighting for a healthy and thriving quality of life for the community, has taught my students and me about the fierceness that fuels this critical kind of optimism. As Zulene has told the students in my environmental justice class, you have to have skin in the game. Our polluted air here is in Chester makes its way over to you in Swarthmore. We're all breathing the same air. So for me, Zulene's activism is a kind of kin-centric ecological optimism, which is not passive finger crossing, wishing for things like solar panels or carbon markets or biodegradable plastics to come to the rescue. It's an active, critical, and embodied form of hopefulness. It means seeing your own body, your own life worlds in the action. Circle and other environmental justice frontline communities that my students and I work with engage with world making or commoning or prefigurative politics through the framing of fighting and building. And as I discussed earlier, I see this fight and build approach as environmental justice groups engaging with two worlding projects simultaneously. So Circle must continue to fight the world of waste management that treats their majority Black community as a toxic dumping ground. And at the same time, the organization is taking steps to build a more just and thriving future for its residents. So in the next part of my talk, I want to show you some images of the way that I try to practice co-resistance and collaborative world building in my own engaged scholarship, pedagogy, and community activism. In my teaching and research, I practice what I call a pedagogy of engagement. That is, providing opportunities for my students to learn from community leaders about what it means to be connected to a place for the long haul and to share gifts to help each other out. In these community engagements, my students learn about the struggles and the accomplishments of activists like Zulene Mayfield, and they learn that that all the waste that their college creates is sent only 3 miles away to Chester to be incinerated. They learned that the Covanta or Reworld incinerator emits harmful pollutants into the air, which results in the city's disproportionately high asthma and cancer rates. So this knowledge and the interactions with the organization result in the students beginning to care about what happens to the people of Chester. And it energizes and fires them up to want to connect their academic studies with active community engagement, to advocate for more just approaches to how our institutions of higher education conduct their business. Zulene has always insisted to me and to my students that it's important for those of us living in the upscale college town of Swarthmore to see ourselves as being in kinship relations with residents of Chester, despite the fact that our backgrounds and life conditions may be miles apart. This message of kinship and interdependency that Zulene has been teaching my students is what she's been promoting for decades to hordes of young people and college students in the area. Students from Swarthmore College and many other local universities have responded to this call over the years to work together for environmental justice. And they've been inspired by the idea that we are all interconnected and that we need to collectively build a more just and sustainable future. And so they formed the organization called C4, or Campus Coalition Concerning Chester, in the early 1990s. I think that C4 represents engaged scholarship and advocacy at its best. That is, it represents students' deep understanding and engagement with their environmental studies coursework and the understanding that they are living in a particular place and connected to the communities with whom they share these places. In other words, the organization C4 helps the students to actively become a part of a community that cares about what's happening to their neighbors, that cares about what's happening at their own university, and that cares about what's happening to the earth. So I want to show you what I had hoped to show you about and get a sense of what some of this collective energy is like that is generated when students get involved in environmental justice building actions. But I'm afraid that I won't be able to share this video because for some reason the technology isn't working. But I think that Litsi has shared a link to the YouTube video in the chat so you can take a look at it when you get a chance. But it's an example of and also various Instagram videos and posts that students are making that really sort of raises the level of energy, of interest and connection working with the communities. And the community organizations, Circle, just absolutely is excited about this energy that young people bring to social media forms of communication. Oops, okay. So as part of being enrolled in my community-based learning courses, students support the organization Circle by helping with many kinship building and community generation activities in partnership with members of the organization. And this includes, for example, community outreach and creating social media content, as I just mentioned, fundraising, data collection on public health statistics, leading workshops on environmental justice and gardening for children and youth in Chester, and working with the youth group, the Circle's youth group, which is called Choices, who are these young people, these teenagers in the city are interested in talking about the connections between environmental racism and gun violence in the city. Students have also testified at local government councils to urge elected officials to change the county's waste management policy. They have presented at academic conferences with me, Zulene, and other Circle organizers, and they have marched and protested and conducted die-ins across the region, raising awareness about the situation in Chester and demanding that we enact more equitable and sustainable policies and life-supporting systems. I wanted to actually also show you this recent Instagram post that a couple of my students created for Circle. I'm afraid I can't show it to you, but I can probably give you the link so that you can take a look at it. But if you do get a chance to take a look at it, you can see this incredible high energy. I can barely keep up with the students sharing what they're learning about the problems happening just next door in Chester that they want to actually join together with the organization to fight against. Just in the past year, the city of Chester has been hit with even more environmental assaults, one by the multinational oil and gas corporation Penn America Energy, which is targeting Chester as the preferred site to build the East Coast's largest liquefied natural gas, or LNG, export facility. And the second assault, this time by the U.S. Department of Energy, is that Chester and the region have been designated to host one of the nation's so-called hydrogen hubs, which is the Biden administration's answer to the need to transition to green energy by funding seven hubs across the country that will experiment with creating non-carbon emitting electricity through the use of hydrogen cells. With the recent surge in proposals by oil and gas conglomerates to build more LNG export terminals in the US in the wake of the Russian war against Ukraine, many grassroots organizations are finding themselves in the position of needing to organize nationally and transnationally. Activists from Louisiana, Texas, Germany, Sweden, and Ukraine have traveled to Chester to start to build the multi-scalar transnational alliances that are needed to confront the entrenched power of global environmental injustice and to register their opposition to the ramping up of fossil fuel infrastructures in Black and brown and low-income communities in the US and around the world. In this slide, you can see a picture of Rasheta Ozain on the left, who's an environmental justice leader fighting LNG facilities that are being fast-tracked on the Gulf Coast, on the coast of Louisiana. Rasheta is currently working with Chester resident and Circle member Carol Kazim, who's on the right, and she is the first Black woman to be elected to the local seat in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. So here are two activists, one a recently elected state representative, who are working to challenge the goal to build an LNG export facility in the city of Chester. So this growing kinship network also includes activists organizing from sites in Europe that are being eyed as the destinations for the exported LNG that's fracked from Pennsylvania's Marcellus shale fields. In an act of transnational solidarity, earlier this year, a member of the German parliament, Lisa Bardem, visited Chester to learn about the proposed LNG terminal. Her goal in coming to the US was to meet with Chester residents and with some of her counterparts in the US Congress in Washington, D.C., and to take this knowledge back to Germany to strengthen her political argument that her country must stop relying on imported natural gas. In an op-ed published a few months ago in the Washington Post and the Philadelphia Inquirer, Bardem explained her opposition to Germany seeking access to Pennsylvania's natural gas. She argues that this prolongs the country's reliance on climate-destroying fossil fuels and slows down the transition to a renewable economy. But more important, because it sustains environmental injustice, creating more toxic sacrifice zones in communities like Chester, who shoulder the world's dirtiest industries and whose health and future generations are endangered. The ongoing partnerships that we've been developing over the years have sprung into action with this new information about the proposed LNG terminal. And in addition to expanding organizing efforts to educate the residents about the dangers of the facility, activists have stormed meetings of corporate and government leaders who claimed that it would be an economic boon for this impoverished and actually bankrupt city. Chester residents and allies from across the Philadelphia metropolitan area showed up last August to register their opposition to this round of environmental racism and climate annihilation. Earlier this year, the Biden administration made the decision to pause approval of the construction and permitting of new LNG export facilities. And you can see here in this picture of our press release, we announced this pause as a win, even though we knew the decision could change at any time. And of course, now we know that the Trump administration intends to strike down all of Biden's initiatives to shift to renewable sources of energy. And Trump will move to increase LNG production and export. At this press release, both the newly elected mayor of Chester and 2 state representatives all expressed their commitment to supporting Chester's transition from a waste dumping ground, accepting everyone's trash, to a city with sustainable economic opportunities for its youth, centered on green jobs and renewable energy. I hope that this multi-pronged coalition building will hold, as it could represent a hopeful step toward building the city's infrastructure toward genuine sustainability. I fear, however, that there are many more years of fighting and resisting that lie ahead. As we know, the state is not always a reliable partner. As part of the Biden administration's celebrated Inflation Reduction Act, the U.S. Department of Energy selected 7 regional so-called clean hydrogen hubs to receive $7 billion in federal funding. The hubs are a part of the Biden administration's efforts to jumpstart the market for low-cost so-called clean hydrogen, which it sees as key to achieving its climate goals. Environmental justice groups are calling this another false climate solution, however, as most of the negotiations are held behind closed doors or include outrageously expensive entry fees to get a seat at the table, with Department of Energy representatives about who will get the big ticket contracts to build and run these facilities. Hydrogen energy is experimental, and it includes a wide range of risks and uncertainties. And now communities are burdened with needing to spend their time and energy educating themselves about these potential problems. So again, fighting is definitely still in the picture. Again, I wanted to show a clip from this action that happened a couple of weeks ago that my students were involved in, that sort of use the recent popularity of the film Wicked to refer to hydrogen hubs as wicked green energy, not really green at all. But I can also put that, give that link, that YouTube link to Litsi, who can share it in the chat. So on the other hand, in other words, on the other hand, in terms of the fighting that is still required of environmental justice organizations in the Philadelphia area and beyond, in the spirit of building and using Walida Emirisha's method of visionary fiction, that is, again, imagining post-incinerator opportunities for more just and sustainable forms of economic development that don't include LNG export terminals or hydrogen hubs. In the spirit of building, we've recently created a regional partnership that we are calling the Good Energy Collaborative. This is a collaboration with activists and action researchers in the region who have joined together in solidarity to create alternatives that reject the extractivist and exploitative economic and political systems that have gotten us here in the first place, and to imagine new regenerative community economies that are focusing on things like solar enterprises, urban agriculture, and arts-based community development. To date, our work has focused on the solar energy transition, providing community education on the connections between environmental justice issues and efforts to expand green jobs training opportunities for residents from environmental justice communities in the local region. We define good energy in broad terms, which certainly includes embracing the shift to clean, renewable electricity generation for environmental justice communities locally and across the globe. But it also imagines the need for all types of energy, agricultural, political, coalitional, educational, among many other things. One of the Good Energy Collaborative's partners is the Reentry Community Farm in Philadelphia, which is a community space organized by Stanley Morgan, who's seen here, and other formerly incarcerated people who are re-entering and reclaiming the community for the people who live there. The disproportionately high rates of incarceration of Black men and women in the city has led to their removal from the community, which also removes their capacity to contribute to the community's economic viability and social cohesion. The Reentry Community Farm holds an abolitionist vision focused on healing and repairing the connections to the land and history in Philadelphia in the face of ongoing dispossession and gentrification. Currently, Good Energy Collaborative partners and students are designing what we're calling solar ag or solar agriculture workshops in both the cities of Chester and Philadelphia to provide youth with visions of alternative futures that include good renewable energy and regenerative agriculture opportunities in an imagined newly created solidarity economy. Of course, all of this world building does require resources and energy of all kinds. Several of our Philadelphia-based Good Energy Collaborative partners just a few days ago were notified that they received millions of dollars in EPA funding to support environmental justice communities in the city. As we know, of course, the state is often a double-edged sword. So on the one hand, in the name of benefiting environmental justice communities to move into the green energy transition, the Biden administration is pushing untested hydrogen hubs, but at the same time, it's working at warp speed to roll out billions of dollars in grant monies to support community organizations in building climate resilience initiatives and workforce development programming before Trump comes in and repeals the act and slashes the funding. Just yesterday, my students and I finished writing an EPA grant called the Thriving Communities Program to support Circle and the Good Energy and other Good Energy partners to fund region-wide youth climate justice and solar ag programming. It does take a lot of energy. Our bigger and longer-term vision for what constitutes good energy is a commitment to transforming a capitalist culture based on exploitation and extraction into a society grounded in interconnectedness and collective care. So good energy must also include rest. Our tagline is, we believe we will need all the good energy we can muster to accomplish this vision. I think this good energy helps us to nurture the life-making practices necessary to strengthen a feminist, abolitionist, ecological politics that we will need to survive and thrive together as our world faces the dangers to come. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you, Giovanna. I think that it was a great talk, and I am so happy that you have accepted our invitation. I see so many points of connection, so much things that we are developing together, even if not always working on the same teams and together. But I hope that this will also happen more and more in the future. And I am now looking at Lizzie and Nuno just in case there are any questions in Facebook, on Facebook or on YouTube. But while we are looking at our friends listening to us, I have a very very naive question for you, Giovanna. As always, I feel sometimes to be a little bit like Alice in the Wonderland. So my question is about the reaction of your university, of your college, because I see your presentation was about so many things, not, but at least for me, I sense a strong commitment to a revolutionary pedagogy, a pedagogy, really in the Paulo Freire's understanding of pedagogy, bell hooks, and teaching to transgress and learning to transgress. So, but on the other hand, I have so many friends, especially in the US, but not only in the US, telling me how difficult it is nowadays to try to do this kind of work for barriers, limits. I could even say threats, maybe, from the institution. Just a few days ago, no, few weeks ago, a friend of mine sent me a message from her university, and it's a university in Florida, telling her that she needed to change the description of her center because she mentioned social justice and environmental justice. So I am wondering what is happening. Is yours a little bit a small island of freedom? It's you are actually struggling, or how do you do it? I don't know if it makes sense. You can
No.
also say, I am not supposed to answer this question without my lawyer. And this could also be a good answer. No, I don't know. If you want to share something, maybe also give some, in a sense, advice to people that are struggling.
No, that's a super observant question. And on the one hand, that yes, I mean, well, one of the things that, even though I do talk about various ideas that have influenced me in terms of my thinking, one of my goals, one of the central components of my work in this talk is pedagogy, and thinking about sort of how what forms of pedagogy are possible, and especially to help to really inspire and instigate young people to think about education, to think about theory, to think about ideas as connecting us, as being as inspiring and sort of inciting action in many ways. And so, I mean, I think that there's a way where the language of sustainability, even the language of environmental justice, kind of can be stealthy. It's sort of, it has sort of taken on an accepted discourse of social justice and sustainability are things that we want, or environmental justice and sustainability are things that we want. And so it's something that the university can support. So offices of sustainability, programs in environmental justice, working collaboratively with communities. I mean, a lot of this kind of community engagement work is used as, in many ways, branding by universities to prove that they are relevant and engage with communities and can teach students to be to be good citizens. But I think, as I said, I think that students can, and faculty who work under the rubric of environmental justice and sustainability can sort of under the radar in many ways create more revolutionary kinds of engagements. Now, that's not true for the students, obviously, at Swarthmore College and many other US universities and others around the world who were protesting what's happening in Gaza and the genocide happening in Gaza and setting up encampments and protests on campus and teach-ins around the situation in Gaza and Palestine. So that is obviously or seen as too subversive, and so students at Swarthmore are now facing all kinds of charges, including possible expulsion for their activism. So and many, if you had been able to see that short clip of the Environmental Justice March in Chester last Earth Day, actually, you would have seen a lot of Palestinian flags and students who are interested in supporting environmental justice in the local region and also seeing the connections with environmental injustices and what many activists call environmental genocide that's happening around the world, including in Palestine. So I think that it's partially the framing, but I think that you're right that there is, well, at least I hope that there is revolutionary thinking and acting and possibilities embedded in this language of environmental justice and equitable forms of sustainability. Does that respond to
Thank
your
you.
question?
Thank you so much, indeed. And I see a few questions. No, let's see Nuno coming up on YouTube. And
Nuno is
I must
gonna
also,
share one.
I should apologize because I think that I stole Juicy. Juicy is also following us, and she asked more or less the same question, I think, Juicy. But it's good that we are more or less, Juicy is also working with me in a project, and I'm so happy that we really were thinking the same direction. No, I think it's really more or less the same kind of question about the institutional barriers that you might encounter. Let's see, Nuno, if there are anything else that we could.
Okay. I can go. There is another. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was great, very interesting, and also was very interested in the topic of the pedagogy of engagement. I have many questions, but I will ask maybe later. There is one question I want to share with you from YouTube from Neil Maher. I will read what he wrote. Thank you very much for your wonderful talk. I teach environmental history and equality in New York. My students say I also work with local community members in New York. My question is, what do you do when a local community member or members do not want to work with you, your students, because you're not from their community or from their demographic? How do you, in other words, how do you, your students handle refusal by local communities member, respecting it while continue your work? So that is the question from thank you very much for your question. And yeah, I'll share with you, Giovanna, that is.
Yes, well, I mean, I think that sort of my vision and in theory of community engagement and pedagogy is I respect the refusal of community residents who don't want to engage with universities, colleges, or white people, white middle class, academics. And there's for many reasons, for many histories of bad practices, bad behavior of researchers coming in and essentially extracting data, extracting knowledge, stories, and then leaving. And so I can assure you, I have heard that critique, and I have been questioned and interrogated by community residents in virtually every of the cities and towns that I've lived in across the United States and worked with communities. So that sort of trust building practice is the absolute first step. And I mean, I think you demonstrate and build trust by not being a dilettante or not parachuting in and parachuting out. You demonstrate trust by continuity and persistence and being there and supporting communities in whatever questions or needs they might have. So by not centering, your own research project, for example. So I mean, Zuline Mayfield, for example, in the leader of the organization in Chester, absolutely refuses to work with many academics in the region at University of Pennsylvania, which is the major flagship research university in this area. And will absolutely complain about these sort of academic forms of extraction and using communities for their own research purposes. So, I mean, it is about the conversation that you have, but if a community organization has no interest in working with you, that refusal is absolutely part of the conversation. And I think that, for a lot of, for many participatory, community based participatory action researchers, the notion of community peer review is something that's, one of the practices that's really taken seriously. And so if you want to write a paper or publish something, and you've used significant stories or data from working with a community, then one of the sort of understandings working with that community is the right of the community to review what's being written and to refuse to have it published if that's what they want. So that is something that is also important. I think the activists who I work with, we try as much as possible when we're doing presentations to actually present together. So I've often many presentations together with many of my partners to sort of have these stories be coming from the voices of the people who are actually living these stories.
Thank you, Giovanna. I completely agree. I can relate a lot with this. I think there is also, as you said, the community review process. It gives trust, as you said, and a non-exploitative, extractivist attitude approach. Also, the co-authorship, I think, is interesting now. So to break a little bit the idea that there is the researcher researching someone or
Exactly.
something. I have done once. I published a book together with 9 female activists from the region of Naples in Italy, with the title Teresa e le altre, because I was collecting their stories and publishing, of course, also my articles. And then at a certain point, I really felt, uncomfortable about this, and I thought that actually we were supposed to write something together, and it was really a very special experience for me. I am buying a little bit of time to, and I'm looking, I don't know if Nuno or Lizzy, there is any other question, please.
We do have. I love all the topic about the, as I was mentioning, the pedagogy of engagement, and also how we have to acknowledge that there is a history of extractivism approach and research toward communities and all everything you say. And with my project where I'm involved now at the University of Toronto, we actually is a community engaged research. We try to really build this reciprocity and all these questions, these topics that emerged during your discussion. In fact, I see many connection with your work, and I'm super interested. And I was wondering how actually you partly already said that, but I would like to understand how you build the grant and project proposal that actually I avoid by definition any extractivism approach, but also how we can think a way to do research that is actually generative instead of extractive. So how we can actually already, for instance, give resource, how we can meet also the local partners where they are, because it's true that sometimes you get a refusal. Maybe you get a refusal for many reasons, but do a community engagement research means to find something in the middle, and sometimes this something in the middle is something different that we need as a researcher, but still we want to generate something that community do, create something that is a positive impact. So I was wondering how we navigate putting together the grant and the research output, in your case also the teaching output, the pedagogical one, but be sure that we can be generative. And in which way we can be generative? Some people say that it's a matter of giving resources that are economic resource, which I think is very important. At the same time seems a bit reductive to me, just to think in these economic honorarium terms. So just wondering, any reflections and ideas on that, and expanding a bit on what you already actually say, and thank you so much. I'm happy to follow up more and talk more about this.
Well, I mean, so there's a feeling of again, the idea of working with one's neighbors, the idea of colleges and universities that are next to environmental justice communities. And, you know, the perfect example, of course, is that the country's largest incinerator is located in Chester. So Chester and all of the waste from every single university in the region and beyond, including New York City, goes to Chester. So this idea that you know, what are the responsibilities or accountability that one has when you're living right next to the community that is suffering from the massive amounts of waste that higher education, you know, which is supposed to be helping to create knowledge, to, you know, to improve the world, when in fact we're destroying the health of our local community. So what is the responsibility of education and research to building generative knowledge and solutions and opportunities when we have that relationship, which is not a very positive one? The communities in both Philadelphia and Chester that I work with see connections with, you know, the realm of education, whether it's in the schools or the universities, as important allies and important partners, and in part because they are interested in young people from the communities gaining that experience and opportunities, connecting with college students and with opportunities that most institutions of higher education can offer. So the I have only had one student from Chester who has ever come to Swarthmore College. The education system in Chester is so bad, is so disinvested in, that young people are unable to get into Swarthmore College. So there's this sense that the community residents in Chester are really interested in building a positive pipeline between the city and the college. And so the young people, we have all kinds of tours and activities where young people come to Swarthmore College and learn about, you know, they ask about all kinds of things. They go to laboratories, they go to see the solar panels, the green roofs, and they learn about education. So that idea of building the possible interactions between young people in Chester and the college is something that crossing those borders, those sort of educational borders, is something that making that more possible is something that the communities have asked for across the board. I see that as generative. I see that as the supporting opportunities and visions for young people who in these environmental justice communities who don't have those opportunities. I mean, that is one of the major asks that we often get. The other one is leaders in the community will often say, we don't have access to technology, we don't have access to research, resources, and we also would love you to train some of our young people in these sort of methods and techniques. So that's another way that I think we try to share resources and to create, partnerships in terms of working on projects together. But mainly my experience has been that community residents are really interested in the resources that academic institutions have, and not just monetary resources, but to provide knowledge resources, research resources, technical resources to help people to make the argument that they are being disadvantaged and harmed. I'm not sure if I'm getting exactly at your question, but I mean that has really been the strength, I think, of why universities and colleges can, are seen as possible as are seen as positive allies that they want to, connect with.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Giovanna, if I may, I just want to say I really enjoyed your presentation very much, the structure and the content. I learned a lot. Thank you so much. And if you have time and kind of picking up a little bit on these pedagogical tools, if it's not too much, maybe you could expand a little bit on Walida Imarisha. I'm not sure if I'm saying the name correctly. So with this practice of reimagination, because I think it connects a lot with the journal, and maybe with some people here on the uses of narratives and poetry, and so language and imagining otherwise, but it seems it's a bit more than that. So maybe you could say a little something about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I teach a course on on storytelling, environmental justice and storytelling, and often use the genres of autobiography and memoir, activists and social justice and environmental justice leaders' stories through autobiography and memoir. And I think that for, in that context, I think Imarisha's idea of storytelling and speculation, speculative fiction, and visionary fiction has been useful. And she argues that it's not simply that visionary fiction is not simply the fun of creating possible stories, but it also needs to be very much part of ongoing engaged community organizing. And so her work has been interesting in our various community events where we actually have residents, young people and adults, write things like fictional letters from the future to the current moment. And it's amazing what people come up with, and also that they somehow become sparked by this idea of imagining a post-incinerator Chester, for example, how many years into the future, hopefully not too many years into the future. But it was really interesting to see the letters that people wrote from the future that had their their visions of what they hope Chester will be, and thanking those who are doing the organizing now and doing the work now to make that happen. And that they talked about things like lots of parks for kids to play in, lots of gardens for people to plant their favorite foods, clean air, so people's asthma, or kids would talk about, so their younger sister's asthma wouldn't be bad anymore. And I think that it's certainly demonstrated to my students the power of that kind of visionary thinking. And it wasn't just some academic or aesthetic activity that one might be doing. So I was impressed with that letter writing exercise. I would recommend it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanna. Actually, once I was asked to send a postcard from I think 2100. So somewhere there is my postcard from the future. I will share with you. I hope it's
Please
fun.
do, yes.
I hope it's fun. I was very optimistic for once in my life, but anyway, we are now ending our meeting with you, Giovanna. So I am so grateful and so happy that
Thank
you
you.
were generous and you find the time to share your insights, your work with all of us, with our resistance community. I do believe that there is a need to join the resistance now, whatever you want to call it. And let me also remember everyone that we will meet again on January 21st with Malcolm Ferdinand, speaking of loving ourselves, the earth, facing the colonial inhabitation of the world. And for now, many thanks again to you, Giovanna, and I hope to see all you around next time.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
You nice holidays.
Thank you, you too. Bye.